to start Tuesday morning, but blue skies for many, but we already have showers from the word go across western parts of the UK, also into central, southern and western Scotland. Sunny spells in between, but through the day we see the cloud thickening out, breaks of rain moving in from the southwest, the wind picking up too. Met Office warning in force from 3 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon, and gusts of 50-60 miles an hour, so leading to some travel disruption. Temperatures feeling cooler than the numbers suggest, 12 to 15 Celsius. Into the evening time, this band of heavy rain pushes northeastwards across the country, leading to some travel disruption, surface spray on the roads. Behind it, clear spells, scattered heavy showers move in overnight. The winds ease for a time, but still staying blustery, and under those clear skies allows temperatures to dip away to around 3 or 4 Celsius. So it means another chilly start to Wednesday morning, but blustery showers from the word go, heavy rain across the north of Scotland, and this band of rain associated with the low actually moves back in again across southwestern areas, and that's when the winds pick up once more, particularly across southwest England, bringing gusts again 50-60 miles an hour. Sunshine and showers expected Thursday and Friday, staying cool.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. Tonight on the show, we're being told once again to limit our use of the NHS, avoid risky behaviour, not because of COVID this time, but because of NHS strikes. Up to 50% of doctors are set to walk out this week. Do you think this advice is an insult, or do you support the walkouts by doctors? Let me know. Then we're going to be talking about the BBC. Is it the least biased outlet out there? I'm asking because Elon Musk, the boss of Twitter, has said so. Do you agree? And there's been calls from campaigners to ban under-16s from smartphones and slap tobacco-style health warnings on the packaging. Do you think that's the right idea? Are our children too obsessed with their screens? And who has come out worse from the Labour ad campaign? The Tories for not locking up enough criminals, or the Labour Party for their dirty and underhand tactics? All of that to come tonight on Dewbs Co, here on GB News, Britain's news channel. But first, let's get the latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Emily, thank you. The top story at just after 6 o'clock on GB News. Politicians across Northern Ireland have today condemned scenes of violence after police came under attack in Londonderry. Well, the PSNI has appealed for calm after missiles, including petrol bombs, were thrown at a police car during an illegal anti-Republican march. The force has been on high alert after the terror threat was raised following warnings of possible attacks on officers. The violence comes ahead of Rishi Sunak's visit to Belfast tomorrow. He's going to be hosting the US President Joe Biden to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the mother of two British-Israeli sisters who were killed in a West Bank attack has died in hospital. Lucy D was travelling with her daughters, Maya and Rena, who were 20 and 15 years old, when their car was targeted by a suspected Palestinian gunman. A funeral was held for the sisters on Friday. Their father and Lucy's husband, Rabbi Leo D, says his family of 7 has now been reduced to 4.
The Israeli flag today sent out a message to humanity, which is, we will never accept terror as legitimate. We will never blame the murder on the victims. There is no such thing as moral equivalence between terrorist and victim. The terrorist is always bad.
Now, in the United States, 5 people have been killed by a gunman in Kentucky shortly after confirming the incident in Louisville. Police said the attacker had been neutralised and no longer posed a threat to the public. 6 other people being treated in hospital. The Kentucky governor, Andy Beshear, says at least 1 police officer was injured.
I have a very close friend that didn't make it today. And I have another close friend who didn't either, and one who's at the hospital that I hope is going to make it through. I want people to know that while today is a horrific act, I do believe that this is a safe community, with officers doing their very best each and every day, and that's what we saw here.
Here, NHS England says emergency care will be prioritised during the junior doctors' strike. The 4-day walkout, which begins tomorrow morning, is being described as the most disruptive industrial action in NHS history. The health body warns the dispute over pay will mean appointments and operations will have to be cancelled, and there'll be immense pressure on both staff and services. Labour says it plans to launch more ads attacking the Prime Minister, the next one blaming him for crashing the economy. The Labour leader has defended the first post targeting Rishi Sunak, which suggests he doesn't want child sex abusers to go to jail. Writing in the Daily Mail, Sir Keir Starmer says he makes 0 apologies for the ad. That's despite criticism from MPs, including those from his own party, with Lord David Blunkett calling it gutter politics. Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry says the criminal justice system is lacking.
Keir Starmer has made it he's dedicated his life to ensuring that the criminal justice system works properly. And he feels very strongly about this and is being very blunt about it. And yeah, we stand by this. If Rishi Sunak really wanted to stop child sex offenders from staying out of jail, he could do something about it, but he is not doing anything about it. They are not taking their failures seriously, and they should be doing a great deal more than they are.
People receiving the state pension will see their payments increase by 10.1% from today. The move was confirmed by the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt in the autumn statement. Depending on the pension, weekly payments will rise to either £156 or £203. 2 climate change protesters have been arrested after jumping a barrier of a dinosaur display in Coventry. The Just Stop Oil activists entered the exhibition at the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum before being tackled by security. The protesters, named by the group as Daniel Knorr and Victoria Lindsell, were arrested on suspicion of causing criminal damage. West Midlands Police says it seized 2 large bags of dry paint. And just lastly, new details have been unveiled about the King's coronation, including the procession route through central London. King Charles and the Queen Consort will be travelling to Westminster Abbey in the Diamond Jubilee State Coach. That's a modern air-conditioned horse-drawn carriage, and they'll only ride in the less comfortable gold carriage, first used, incidentally, in 1831 for King William IV on their return journey. Crown jewels will also feature during the service, including the sovereign's sceptre. Camilla, though, will hold the Queen Consort's rod, which is controversially made from ivory. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News. Now back to Emily.
Yes, welcome to Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. Now, joining me until 7, my panel, Joe Phillips, political commentator. Thank you for coming back. And Martin Daubney, the journalist and former Brexit Party MEP. Good evening to you both and good evening to you at home. You can get in touch with us about all of tonight's topics this evening on GBViews at gbnews.uk. I want to start with this rather bizarre advice that we're being given once again by the NHS, by the NHS chiefs, that we should avoid risky behaviour and avoid putting extra pressure on the NHS. Martin, what do you think about this? It's not the first time we've been asked to avoid using our health service.
I don't know about you, but if I am about to have a heart attack or a motorcycle accident, I tend to plan it. And so I tend to know when that's going to happen to me. Not. And don't you think that this bizarre concept that it's our job to protect the NHS as opposed to the NHS job to protect us. Don't forget, it's often said it's free. It's not free. We pay for it with our stamp and tax every month as taxpayers. And, you know, there's a sense, I think, of a growing sense of entitlement that we almost defer to the holy order of the NHS. And the pay demand itself, 35% pay demand, is just, that's a stuff of fantasy. That would be £2 billion per year, every year, in perpetuity. Where's that meant to come from? The British Medical Association, I think, is becoming overtly political. There's a general election come in. They want to damage the Tories as much as possible. They're a bunch of lefty activists at the BMA, let's face it. But this idea that we must use the NHS less so doctors can have a day off is for the birds.
Do you see it that way? Do you think there's some truth to perhaps the BMA radicalising some of these doctors? I don't believe that they would have taken this type of action only a few years ago.
Well, only a few years ago, before COVID, perhaps, Emily, before they were all under such huge pressure, before they've seen so many of their number leaving after a relatively short time in the service. I mean, there's something in one of the papers today that the exodus of NHS staff, doctors, to Australia is at its highest level. Meanwhile, you know, we're trying to recruit paramedics from Australia. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, they are under pressure. That I agree with Martin that 35% is absolutely, you know, it's unfeasible.
Pie in the sky.
Yeah, it's pie in the sky. But the government and the doctors' union need to sit down, whether they do it together or they do it through ACAS, the Advisory Conciliation Service, that has, you know, you don't hear very much of these days, but was always around to solve and help sort out industrial disputes. But to go back to your original point about, you know, telling people not to do risky things, I don't think people think, the doctors are on strike, I won't go up and, you know, decorate that top floor window.
No.
But I do think there is an element of saying to people, and in a way, you know, people do take the NHS for granted, and a lot of people use A&E instead of going to the doctor, the pharmacy, trying to work it out for themselves.
So you think this advice holds every day of the year?
Well, yes, actually. I mean, be sensible, only go to A&E when it's an accident or an emergency. You don't really need to lay it in, but, you know, people do sometimes need to
That
be
is
told.
true, but the problem is that you can't always get a GP appointment.
Well,
We've
no,
seen headline after headline, and we've experienced it ourselves, I'm sure, firsthand, how difficult it is to get one of them.
I think most people have given up trying to get a doctor's appointment, and the quickest way of getting a GP's appointment in Britain seems to be to come in on a rubber dinghy from France, and you'd be straight in. Look at people in Skegness who can't get a doctor's appointment.
Do you know, Michelle's in Skegness right now.
Well, I hope she's not trying to go to a doctor's appointment.
She's in the caravan. I bet it's windy and cold there.
I should say Michelle will be back tomorrow evening, so tune into that.
The point you made about taking the NHS for granted, I think the NHS takes the public for granted, actually. It's like we're meant to be unwavering supporters. We're not meant to question the rhetoric. We're not meant to question the endless pay rises. We're not meant to question strikes, which could see people die. Let's face it. You know, if doctors are striking, this is a life-threatening point of risk.
There's a whole load of things in that, Martin. I think the NHS needs to change, for sure. And I think it needs to be stopped. We need to stop holding it in this sort of holy aspect of something that cannot change, must always be the same. You know, it's a bit like people think, we want a Hattie Jake-style matron back in cottage hospitals. But we also want incredibly complicated, high-tech surgery for free tomorrow.
It would be nice, though, if the BMA was involved in constructive talks about how to improve the NHS. Because there is an irony, isn't there? Because the junior doctors, they stand there saying how fantastic the NHS is, universal health care, free at the point of use. But then we hear so much about doctors leaving to go to Australia, which has a system of social insurance, and moving to even the US, where they have a very unfair health service.
And you can understand why if people get completely and utterly burnt out with the overload. And I mean, the workloads in hospitals.
Well, it's also for an increased pay offer abroad. It's often more attractive. To take years of taxpayer-funded in-job training, junior doctors are paid less, but after 3 years, their pay goes up substantially. It could be on 80 grand after 5 years. That's a great salary for most ordinary people to gauge by. But they're getting taxpayer-funded training, then they're clearing off to Australia because the weather's better and the pay's better. And what about our dependence on doctors and nurses that we're taking from the third world, from places like Uganda, from places like India? We're brain draining their best talent away because they get less money, whereas ours are clearing off to Australia because they want more money.
So we need to have a fundamental, and I think successive governments of either colour have actually refused to deal with this and talk about how you do it. I mean, Patricia Hewitt, the former Labour Health Secretary, has been asked by the government to do a report, and she's come out with some interim findings. And one of them is stop having national targets, make it much more local, because depending on where you live, local doctors, local GPs, local primary services will know where the pressure points are. You know, in some areas it might be older people, in other places it might be people with more mental health or other problems. So there needs to be some sort of flexibility. And the other problem, of course, is the buildings. That while you can have this super technology and you can have this brilliant kit, if you haven't got anyone to operate it, there's no point in having it. And some of the buildings of old hospitals, they have to have lead-lined ceilings and things like that to put MRI scanners and things like that in.
I just think that looking at the NHS at the moment, it's clearly not serving patients and it's not serving the doctors. If they all want to, well, not all of them, but if quite a few of them, a significant minority, are leaving or thinking about leaving, and I think there's a majority thinking about leaving, and we see that in other professions, clearly there needs to be some, out-of-the-box thinking about how we can do better, because, we're not in the 50s anymore. Things have changed.
100% agree, and they should get their own shopping order for starters. I mean, look at the sort of wastage on things like procurement, paying pounds for toilet rolls, paracetamol, wasting money on management, diversity, equity, net zero officers.
Letters.
But letters, I mean, I had a letter, and I'm sure many of the viewers will have had the same experience. I had a letter telling me that an appointment that I didn't even know I'd got had been cancelled. Then 3 days later, I got a letter about the original appointment, which has now been cancelled. That's 2 bits of postage. Somebody's got to sit there, type it, print it out, and there's no joined up.
There is this thinking, though, and it comes from the BMA or just the way we talk about the NHS, that it is free. But I do think we need to remind ourselves, and also, dare I say it, the NHS itself, that we do pay for it. Most of us, at least, do contribute through our taxes. So we should expect a service. You know, if I go on Deliveroo or Amazon and I pay money for something, I expect to receive that product or that service.
Yeah,
should it be as simple as that? Is it different?
It shouldn't be different. And indeed, in a lot of the countries where they extol the virtues of the balance between private and public, such as like Germany, they have a system where people are encouraged to go private if they can afford to do so to relieve the burden. And why not do the same here? Why?
I think that's a bit unfair, actually, because those who go private are probably people who have paid the most tax.
Yeah, that is true. And the top taxpayers are supporting the most at the bottom for a service which often is free if you're on benefits or things like that. So there's already a huge inequity in what's put in and what goes out. The idea that it's kind of fat cats that are abusing the system is completely misplaced. And that's the problem with the NHS. It's now become so politicised. It's become so kind of the Tories are bad and the BMA are attacking the Tories. And the timing is absolutely, I think, you know, reprehensible. This is all about the May elections. It's all about causing damage to Conservatives. The NHS has now become a hugely politicised attack vehicle.
And straight after the bank holiday.
It always has been. And, you know, no government has ever had the gumption to get round the table and talk about it, because some of the things that need to be done are, you know, they're killing sacred cows, if you like.
I do wonder, because the majority of people, according to the polling, were in support of the doctors' strikes, the initial strikes in the NHS, particularly the nurses. But I'm just having a quick little glance at some of the views coming in. And I remember a few months ago, maybe, there was far more support. These all do seem to be the views that we'll go to them soon, but coming in do seem to think, actually, this is a bit much. They are being radicalised now. It is becoming a little bit selfish, telling us not to use risky behaviour. But this is totally risky behaviour, walking out.
Yeah, and if people start dying because they cannot get care, how is that the individual's fault who happens to fall ill? Whereas they are specifically, deliberately walking out and downing tools, which puts lives in danger. It's placing the onus on the public when they are the ones who should be serving us. It's the COVID blues, it's the hangover from lockdowns, still taking control of the mindset.
It does feel like that. I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to move on. We'll be coming back to this topic shortly. I'll be getting to your views as well. But coming up, Elon Musk describes, he's the Twitter boss, describes the BBC as government-funded, but also one of the least biased news sources out there. Is he right? Stay tuned.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, as a bombshell new book claims the Queen branded Harry and Meghan's behaviour quite mad, is it time the King finally removed the toxic couple's titles? The Telegraph's star columnist Celia Walden gives her take. Plus, US swimming star and Leah Thomas rival Riley Gaines speaks out on the terrifying attack she suffered at the hands of trans extremists. Join Dan, Lawrence Fox, Kelvin Mackenzie and more of Britain's top commentators 9 to 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock, Joe Phillips, political commentator, and Martin Daubney, the journalist and former Brexit Party MEP, and also part-time presenter at GB News.
That's right.
Part-time?
Yeah, I am part-time.
He's on all the time. He's on all the time. Sorry, I don't wish to downplay your CV there. Anyway, we're going to go straight to your views on the NHS because lots of you have been getting in touch. Gus says, this is on the issue of striking doctors, Gus says, these young doctors have clearly taken the hypocritical oath and are perfectly happy to be trained in a state system, then go to the highest bidder abroad at the first opportunity. Yep. Hypocrites, the lot of them. I would like to think that most of them do intend, at least initially, to stay within the NHS, but who knows? Maybe
but
they don't.
You could use that argument about the numbers of people doctors who then go and work in private practice. Because all the time we're saying, do your hybrid thing, which may or may not work, but the doctors who are doing those private operations are not operating in NHS.
But the taxpayer funds their training. Anyway.
I don't mind them topping up their money with a little bit of private work. But yes, when they bleat on about how important the NHS as a national health service is, it is a bit hypocritical, I would say. Baz says, having lost both parents to inept doctors, there is no accountability. As for a pay rise, ... Yes, I mean, there are a lot of horror stories from the NHS in terms of, inadequate care. I would say, and I do believe this to be true, though, that most practitioners do their best. Sometimes it falls short, though, unfortunately. Janet says, it annoys me that these strikers are wanting more money because all of the years they haven't got inflation-busting pay rise. But they accepted these rises at the time, so don't cry about what you agreed to. Yes, no one forces you to be a doctor. You do know what the pay scale is. But there is an argument that it should rise, but then everyone's been squeezed by inflation. It's tough. It's tough for most people out there, isn't it, Jo?
Yeah, it is. And I do think there is an element of truth in the fact that, they're saying this 35% is because of 10 years of, and as the person who's just emailed in, well, why did you accept the deal? But to a certain extent, that answers your first question, Emily, that maybe that's why the BMA has become a bit more radical, because people are now saying, hang on a minute, you're our representatives, why did you accept this? And we're now in this position. So, all organisations change. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bunch of, what did you call them, Martin? A bunch of lefty doctors.
I stand by it.
You stand by. He stands by what he says. That's good. People should stand by what they say. Richard, unless they made a mistake, of course.
What, like Elon Musk? What a beautiful segue.
No, we've got one more view because it's slightly different vibe to this one. Richard says, if successive governments hadn't cut back on staffing levels over the last 40 years, there would be enough staff so they wouldn't have to work such long hours. Everything that's wrong with the NHS was inflicted on them by politicians who knew nothing about how it ran. Well, there you go. Is it the government's fault? Is it the NHS manager's fault? Is it the bureaucracy's fault? Is it just the system's fault? you can't blame doctors, nurses and the staff within the NHS, at least for some of the problems that the NHS faces. Anyway, we're going to move on, but please do keep your views coming in on the NHS. We may return to it, who knows. Now, in surprise news from America, it turns out Twitter boss Elon Musk is a keen viewer of the BBC. I'm sure he also watches GB News. The Beeb has objected to a designation on its Twitter page, describing it as government-funded media. There it is on the screen for you, claiming it is and always has been independent. Musk defended the description, but did say, I should note that I follow BBC News on Twitter because I think it is among the least biased. Well, is the BBC as impartial as it claims? Joe, I'll let you take the floor on this one.
Well, yes, it is. And it is funded by the licence fee, plus its commercial operations of selling programmes abroad and formats and what have you. But it is extremely strictly regulated through its royal charter. The idea that it is a state-run broadcaster like RT, Russia Today, or Chinese outfits or any other things that you could think of is utterly ludicrous. So here we are. Twitter gets something wrong. Is that a news story? No. Have they corrected it? I don't know. I don't do Twitter.
But you're wise, Joe.
Well, I mean, you know, the only time I ever look is sometimes after these programmes.
Oh, to have a look at the clips?
Well, no, only because people are so vile and so offensive and so abusive. I sort of think, well, why would I? However...
Well, let's say to people at home, don't be so mean. No. Don't be so mean.
There's no need to be rude.
We can all disagree. We're all kind here.
But I do think, you know, the BBC is... It can't please anybody. You know, it's attacked by governments of all shades. It comes under pressure from governments, as we know. It's got a chairman at the moment, a friend of Boris Johnson's, who sorted out the meeting that apparently arranged the loan. There's all sorts of, you know, dodgy questions about people. And there are some spectacularly awful mistakes they've made, not least of all through Jimmy Savile. But it is, by and large, the most trusted broadcaster in the world, and it is very important to include in this, which is not funded by the licence fee, is the World Service, which for people around the world whose only other media is proper state-sponsored media, it's really important because it's a voice of independence. But the BBC does, you know, it won't run something unless it's independently verified.
It does get it wrong, though. Yes, we can say, OK, compared to other countries which are authoritarian or are dictatorships, it is probably less biased than RT, for example.
Yeah. Well, definitely.
But it does get things wrong. I mean, particularly over the Brexit debate, but other issues as well. I mean, I've got information here. Radio 4's Today programme between 2004-2015, just 132 of the 4,275 guest speakers on things relating to the European Union were in favour of withdrawing for the EU. So that's 3.2% of all the guests they had on
one programme.
EU-related. But that's the Today programme. That's one of their biggest radio shows.
The BBC isn't as biased as, say, Kim Jong-un's media. It's not as biased as Russian state media, but it is biased. And it is biased in terms of Brexit. I know that, having stood for election and been one of the sole Brexiteers on a BBC panel endlessly, I was against 3 or 4 people. Now, you could say
you bullied Martin.
I gave as good as I got. and in fact, it may be a great debater, but... The fact of the matter is that's not necessarily because the BBC is inherently biased, it's because it reflected the political class who were biased. Because the political class was 2/3 Remain, 1/3 Brexit, and therefore the guests reflected that. So the BBC were replicating an inbuilt bias into our political class. Therefore, the media was intrinsically biased. The BBC is very biased on things like NHS pace rights. When would they ever criticise the NHS? When would they put an alternative view across to climate change or net zero taxes? When would they challenge things like racism being a fact of British culture? They do churn out biased news, just like Channel 4, or just like ITV, or just like, say, Sky News. But of course, the difference is we have to pay for this, and if we don't, we can go to jail. So that's the point. The BBC, I think, has problems with bias, and they replicate an endless story, I think, of division, politically, socially, identity politics, racism, sexism, slavery. The BBC tells us all the time that Britain is bad. Britain used to be celebrated by the British broadcasting company. It no longer is. And actually, look on the bright side, that's why GB News exists.
Well, there you go. There is space for us all. But, Joe, for me,
David Attenborough's Wild Isles is a celebration of Britain.
It's a propaganda vehicle for the world's going to die because of climate change.
You can't have it both ways.
It's unwatchable.
It's an absolute,
depressing
paean to nature in these islands.
OK, well, take another data set. People put these together to show BBC bias. For example, the BBC dedicates far more programming to the discussion of inequality rather than, say, the promotion of economic growth or reducing the deficit in the past. Do you think those editorial choices are without a bias?
I think it's very difficult when you work in a large media organisation, and I think, it is probably true to say that a large proportion of journalists, particularly in London, do reflect a certain viewpoint. And I think that's something that the BBC is very well aware of and has tried to address, not always entirely successfully. But I think there is an element of truth in what Martin says, that it reflects the people around. In the same way that GB News does, actually. That you're reflecting your viewers' views by and large. But I do think it's really important to say that it is, to the point, I think, sometimes of its own navel-gazing, trying to get the balance right, and they are much more timid now and frightened because the licence fee is under threat.
Yes, well, I do think that it's fair, Martin, to say that they have changed a little bit. They are trying to invite more diverse people on, more socially conservative people, for example, more people with different views on, say, net zero. They are changing up a little bit, and I think that's a reflection of the changing media scene. Places like GB News are a threat.
Yeah, I've been on BBC programmes endlessly, and I used to talk a lot about the inequality faced by white working-class boys who've been the bottom of the stack for 25-plus straight years. The data is irrefutable. And yet when you go on a BBC programme and talk about it, you're instantly shot down as being divisive and racist. Data isn't racist. The facts are the facts. But trying to get that across on a BBC panel show is next to impossible. Because, again, back to the political class reflecting who gets on the BBC, the mindset of BBC employees tends to be metropolitan, liberal, university educated, quite middle class, quite well off. And as a consequence, it's a hive mind. You don't get working class representation there. You don't get people who grew up knowing what poverty really is. Poverty is a concept to these people.
But I think
it's not a reality.
I think they are trying to address it. And I think, we're talking about, domestic issues predominantly. But then look at Lise Doucette, Jeremy Bowen, all of those fantastic foreign correspondents. And I would pay my licence fee just for that, because I trust them.
That is all we've got time for on that one, but we'll come back to it, I think, because there's a lot to talk about. But coming up, are smartphones leaving the nation's youngsters depressed, isolated and detached? That's what one parenting group thinks. We'll ask if such smartphones, should be banned for children. Stay tuned.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock is Joe Phillips, the political commentator, and Martin Daubney, the journalist and former Brexit Party MEP and GB News presenter.
Part-time.
No, full-time. Always on the telly. You can't get him off. I think people enjoy your input, so it's good. Anyway, you've been getting in touch at home about the BBC. Lots of messages coming in. Dusty says, biased broadcasting company. Stick to what you're good at, wildlife documentaries and period drama, and get out of news and current affairs. Well, that is a strong opinion there. Susan says the BBC is funded in part by the licence payer, but haven't they also received £70 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? Don't know about that. Roy says the answer is simple. No. Defund the BBC from public money. It can then earn its own keep on its merit. Yes, the Defund the BBC campaign did get quite a lot of wind under its sails for a while.
It did.
I'm not sure. It seems to have sort of gone a bit quiet, perhaps. And David says it may not be government-run, but it has an editorial policy which is leftist. It's leftist. Yeah. It's also unbalanced in the presentation of opposing views, silencing the voices it doesn't want heard.
I remember, and you will also know, that Alistair Campbell, who was Tony Blair's head of communications and, director of communications, and Peter Mandelson, now Lord Mandelson, when Labour were in power, used to spend most of their time shouting at the BBC, claiming that they were biased against the Labour Party. So, you're never going to please the party in government.
Yes.
And I think that means that they're probably getting it about right.
And the Corbynistas didn't like them too much
they don't
either.
Like
right, moving on. Is it time we banned under-16s altogether from using smartphones? That's the view of parenting group Us For Them. And they're backed by Catherine Barbel-Singh, who is regarded as Britain's strictest head, whose methods have won plenty of praise. The group thinks the addictive nature of smartphones can leave kids isolated and depressed. They want them banned and also plastered with the type of health warnings you see on cigarette packets. Martin, right, you're a family man.
Yes.
How do you keep your children under control when it comes to screen time?
You basically just discipline when they're allowed to have it. You make sure that you do it when you're in the same room. So my son is 13, not quite 16 yet. But basically, he doesn't have a phone in his room, doesn't have a computer in his room, doesn't have an iPad in his room. It's a communal device. He's allowed to use it when we're around. I think that's a sensible thing. As for this legislation, Us For Them and Catherine Barbel-Singh are incredible campaigners, and they care deeply about children's well-being. In fact, they both were quite isolated in speaking out about the damage of lockdowns and masks and vaccines and all of that on kids back in the day. And I think their position comes from one of genuinely caring about the welfare of young people. I've interviewed Catherine, and she said to me 90% of arguments in schools now start because of social media, because of smartphones. And it's a direct cause of bullying. Banning them altogether, it's impossible. We can't even ban drugs. How the hell are we going to ban phones? That's the problem. Kids will find a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. There'll be somebody prepared to supply it to them. I'm also against that kind of authoritarian control. But in schools, I think there's a solid case for removing phones. In fact, there's evidence in Spain where they did this in 2015 in 2 regions. So they have a unique situation where they could test it against the rest of the country. And where there were no phones in schools, children over the course of an academic year were putting on an extra year. They were scoring 10 or 12% extra in science and maths.
That doesn't surprise me, actually, because they are just so distracting.
Correct.
The problem, though, Joe, is that parents and adults are just as bad now, aren't they?
Well, yes, and I think, I totally agree. Banning them is absolutely bonkers and pointless, and it wouldn't work for reasons that Martin said. And it is about how you, as a parent or a grandparent or as a teacher or a carer or whatever, deal with it. But if you're a child walking along or in the car or in a pushchair even, and all you see is your parents on the phone or playing on the phone, it's got to start at home.
It's monkey see, monkey do.
And absolutely. And I think, I do think there is a place for digital technology, and I think they can be in the same way as television. People said, oh, you can't have television, it's terrible, it's going to destroy kids. They're all going to turn out to be monsters and all the rest of it.
Haven't they?
Well, I don't know. But, actually, if you sit with the child, and it's like reading a book. If you play games with them, you can now, talk to nanny or something on a FaceTime or stuff like that, or cousins and uncles and aunts. We shouldn't just sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
But we do need to recognise, and I think certainly nobody at primary school should be having it. What's the thing at your son's school then, Martin, if you don't mind me asking? Are they allowed to have phones? Because most places won't let them have them.
They're allowed to take them into school. And actually, a lot of parents are really insisting their children do have phones because of tracking them and getting parental safety issue, but they're not allowed to get them out. Certainly not in classrooms. Of course, kids do.
Yes, that's the issue, isn't it?
My cousin's Mrs. Caroline, she's a head teacher in Vauxhall, just down the road, and she won't allow any phones are checked in the morning in a locker. You're not allowed to have them all day. And she says to the parents, if you don't like it, go to a different school.
She sounds very sensible.
But that seems to be the answer.
That does seem to be the answer. I'm concerned by what this psychologist that's cited in an article in The Telegraph about this drive to potentially ban smartphones. He's worried about how brains are affected by constantly being on screens in terms of attention span. Kids can't listen to something for longer than a minute or two because they're on TikTok, or they can't concentrate on reading a book, which obviously children used to do for fun far more, I would guess. And also things like depression, addiction problems, all of that.
Oh, all of that. And there is absolutely no doubt that, bullying and, particularly sexual bullying in secondary school children and younger starts with mobile phones and it starts with social media and it goes on through social media. But, when you've got adults who use social media to be offensive, rude, abusive and threatening...
But the trouble...
Where's the authority?
But the trouble with prohibition and teenagers... It's never worked.
It doesn't work.
It
doesn't work, but I do feel sorry for children and teenagers these days. They can't get away from the bullies, can't get away from the constant body image problems, the TikTok, everything. Everything. Anyway, we've got to move on. Sorry, we could have spoken about that for much longer.
You can't concentrate.
I can't concentrate. Coming up, the row continues over Labour's attack ads. But who comes out worse from all this vitriol? Labour or the Tories? Don't go anywhere. My panel are about to give their verdict.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company still until 7 o'clock is Joe Phillips, political commentator, and of course Martin Downey, the journalist and former Brexit Party MEP. Now, you've been getting in touch. It seems that perhaps we're the Luddites, we're the authoritarians in this conversation. It seems like you at home think that, well, smartphones are beneficial for young people. John says, my grandson had a smartphone, aged 7, he's already programming. This is vital for his development for the future. How will a boy starting at 16 ever catch up? That's a very good point.
7? He's programming?
Yeah.
Blimey.
Well, maybe he's a little genius, or this is just
Sounds
normal
like
now,
it,
you know.
yeah.
Ellis says, well, if you ban smartphones, you may as well ban computers because that is all a smartphone
Absolutely.
is, a computer. Yes, but it's not with you constantly.
No.
They have these phones. They can't get away from the bullying. They can't get away from the images they're bombarded with. They can't get away from the constant communication. I can't imagine what that would have been like.
Oh, awful.
Like, if I got prank calls every now and again or did things like that, but not constant
And that
messages.
constant.
Apparently, the kids are added to WhatsApp groups where they're then bullied. So just added to a group, bullied, and then dropped, whatever. It's just hideous. Peter says it's not the government's job to restrict smartphones for children. It is the parents' responsibility. Parents should be held accountable for their child's usage. Well, there you go. Martin is the strict parent, so he's doing that. So there you go. Right, we'll move on to our final topic. It's time to settle this once and for all. All weekend, people have been debating Labour's controversial ads, of course, attacking the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, on his record on crime. Unedifying stuff, perhaps, but who comes out worst? The Tories, because their record on crime comes under scrutiny, or Labour, because they are seen as lowering the tone? Joe, what do you think?
I think it's very bad for politics generally, because I think a lot of people thought, we've got rid of the drama and the chaos and the nonsense of Johnson and Truss. Keir Starmer could have perfectly easily had a poster or a picture of Rishi Sunak with those two that I've just mentioned, and Dominic Raab and Jeremy Hunt, saying they're all the same, nothing's changed.
True.
And I think that this brings down to the level, it's hard to think of anybody sinking to the level of Boris Johnson when he accused Keir Starmer of not prosecuting Jimmy Savile, which was a new low even for him. I don't think this has done the Labour Party any favours, but I'm really concerned that people will go, oh, they're both as bad as each other, I'm not going to bother to vote, and that's a real problem.
It will be quite interesting what turnout is at the local elections.
And you've got to have your ID card.
And you've got to have your ID card. Well, perhaps we'll debate that on another show.
Yeah.
Don't have time to debate that on this one, though. Martin, it's also perhaps a little bit of a mistake because the light is being shone now on not only the Tories' record, but also Keir Starmer's record when it comes to sentencing and deciding those guidelines.
Yeah, I think the problem with going on the attack like this is that you can't throw stones if you live in a glass house. Keir Starmer's record on grooming gangs was terrible. Labour councils turning a blind eye to thousands of white working-class girls sexually abused for years. The Labour Party didn't want to be...
But that's not Keir
hang on a
Starmer,
sec.
that's a Labour
It's the Labour
council,
Party,
mate.
right? And then he's attacking them on violent crime. The most violent crime in Britain is in London. Sadiq Khan is a Labour mayor. You know, so these things have happened on Labour watches all the time. It's next going to move on, we believe in today's Times, to the Tories' record on trashing the economy. Well, Keir Starmer clapped along while lockdown payments were put through, while furlough bankrupted the country, while the economy was crashing because it was locked down. He wanted all of that too.
What's it going to say? Does Rishi Sunak care about crashing the economy?
Well,
No, he doesn't.
I can see why they're doing it. I just think they focus group or whoever decided that it was a good idea has not really stopped to think that actually people are fed up with abusive personal attacks. What they want and what people, I think, have craved for is a bit of boring normality whilst everything gets back to something resembling...
You see, the thing about Rishi Sunak is he's many things. I'm no fan of Rishi, but he comes across as a decent, honourable public servant, not the sort of guy that you'll go after in this personal way. Boris Johnson, yeah, I mean, open season. He's been rude to Keir, but
severe corner is what he called him.
Yeah, I just don't think the British public like a bully,
No,
and I think
don't.
Starmer comes across like a bully.
I think it's somebody, Marina Hyde in the Guardian, wrote yesterday, what was that awful thud? Sir Keir Starmer falling off his high horse.
Well, that is true, and that's good to see that written in The Guardian, actually, because there has been quite a lot of love, blind love, for Keir Starmer, perhaps just because he isn't a Conservative, maybe.
Well, and he's not Jeremy Corbyn.
And he's not Jeremy Corbyn, of course, crucially. Graham, at home, you say the truth is that this ad is not true and it's offensive. Well, yes, that's it's not true. Labour are clearly worried that Rishi is making progress. Even Labour members don't agree with the ads. We're seeing the real Starmer. His halo has slipped. Well, there you go. That was what Joe was saying. Max says this is typical of Starmer's sleaze party over the last few years. Typical lawyer tactics, i.e. if you have nothing in your defence, then make up something defamatory on the opposition. Yes, is this a lawyer at work?
Yeah, and Maggie Thatcher, didn't she say, you know you're winning when they're attacking you personally because they've ran out of things to get you on ideas. I think there is a bit of that. It doesn't feel like Keir Starmer. It feels like the backroom boys are taking over. They've been to Australia and taken advice. They've been to America and taken advice of the Biden campaign. Those countries have very different political, aggressive, attack video-style politics. I think the Brits don't like this. It doesn't feel Queensberry rules.
Someone else is pulling the strings, it feels, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but clearly taking this direction.
And I agree. This doesn't feel the authentic voice of Keir Starmer to me. And I understand that, Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, was not aware of this. Now, we've just seen Emily Thornberry defending it, but Lucy Powell, the Shadow Culture Secretary, had a very difficult job trying to defend it.
You say this doesn't feel like Starmer, but will the real Keir Starmer please stand up? I am begging him, because I think a lot of people... We saw the polling the other day saying that people think he lacks a vision. They don't know what he stands for. He's kind of creeping into Conservative territory and then back to the left again. No one really knows.
And I think that's a good point, because you can attack somebody else's ideas, but to not like an idea isn't the same thing as having an idea. Where do you stand on stopping the boats? Where do you stand on turning the economy around? Where do you stand on inflation, on cutting gun crime down? Because your mayor can't do it in London. So give us your policies, give us your ideas, play the ball and stop playing the man.
Last word to you.
Well, we've had 13 years. We know what the Tories do, and they've pretty much messed everything up.
Well, there you go. I'll let people at home decide. Yes, we'll see what happens at the ballot box. But anyway, thank you very much indeed to my wonderful panel, Joe Phillips and Martin Dobney. I think you'll agree they've been fantastic,
Pleasure.
as always. Michelle will be back tomorrow. She'll be in this seat, back from Skegness, or Skeg Vegas, as she calls it. Nigel Farage is coming
Racing.
up at the top of the hour, so you won't want to miss that. Have a lovely evening.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We have wind warnings in force for western parts of the UK through Tuesday and on Wednesday as an area of low pressure brings some wet and windy weather to our shores. We can see that nicely on the bigger picture. This area of low pressure bringing those strong winds, outbreaks of heavy rain. It could lead to some local disruption. We could see gusts of 50 to 60, possibly 70 miles an hour around some western coasts over the coming days. A fairly quiet evening after a lively afternoon. We saw some rumbles of thunder. During the early hours, we'll continue to see some showery outbreaks of rain in places, but there are plenty of clear spells too. Turning quite chilly, temperatures down to low single figures in the towns and cities. Perhaps a touch of grass frost to take us into Tuesday morning, but plenty of blue skies to compensate, but some showers from the word go. This band of more showery rain across parts of Scotland too. But it is the thicker